Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I'm Harry. Before we go any further, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button somewhere on the lower right hand side of your screen. That way we could all move on with our lives and enjoy the rest of this video. Today I have another top 10 list for you all. Today I'll be doing my top 10 auction bidding games. And as I worked on this list, I came to realize and appreciate more how much I truly enjoy this mechanism. Many of these games on my top 10 list today are some of my favorite absolute games of all time, and they include auction bidding. And that's another thing I want to point out, is that not all these 10 games might not be the first games you think about when you think about auction bidding, but they each include auction bidding. For some of these games, the auction and bidding is a little bit more of the game, of the actual game, and for some of these other games, it's only part of the game. But to me, if I considered it for this list, it had to be a crucial part of the game, something that truly mattered. And I also I had to enjoy how it was implemented in this game. So speaking of that, the way I ordered this list from 10 to 1 is not necessarily indicative of how much I like the game overall, but instead of how much I like the way that the auction and bidding is implemented in these particular games. So my higher games might not necessarily be the games I like the most, but they're definitely the ones that I think of when I think of auction bidding. All right, without any further ado, let's go straight into the list with my number 10 auction bidding game of all time, and that is High Society by Dr. Rainer Knizia. And this game is a classic game. I think they have a new edition that came out not too long ago. Basically, you know, as in many auction bidding games, you do need multiple players. You need at least 3. I think it accommodates 3 to 5. And what's interesting is players are bidding simple, you know, pass or raise type of bidding, where in clockwise order, those are the 2 choices you have. You either increase the bid that the previous player made, or you pass because you're no longer interested. And you're bidding for different properties. And what's interesting about this game is that you have currency cards, and you only have one of each type of currency. So you have, let's say, a $1 million card, and a $2 million card, and a $3 million card, and a $5 million card, and a $10 million card, and a $12 million card. And again, for each of these individual currencies, you only have one of that type. But when you bid, you cannot make change. You are bidding with the cards that you lay down, right? So the way you manage and manipulate that hand of different currency cards in and of itself is kind of like the heart of the game. Now, some of the unique contributions that this game has is that they have a few negative cards where you're going to kind of do a reverse bid or an opposite bid, where really what you're trying to do is you're trying to keep on increasing and staying in the bid, so that the first player to drop out of that particular bid is the loser, and that player has to take that negative card that gives you negative points. Now, what's really interesting about this game is after it's all said and done, it's a filler of a game, by the way. After it's all said and done, we count the points. However, the person who has the least money doesn't even factor into the winning situation, right? So you might actually theoretically have won the most bids and have had, you know, lots of points in your collection. However, because you have the least money, because perhaps you overpaid for some of these things, you don't even qualify to win this game. So you want to be economical, you want to be somewhat frugal and efficient in the way you handle your funds. My number 10 auction bidding game, High Society. Now we move on to my number 9, and that is Colosseum. Amazing, wonderful game by Wolfgang Kramer and Markus Lübke. And this game is basically, you know, you're running the Colosseum as a theater or a production of sorts. You're trying to, you know, attract spectators to come and see your events. You're trying to attract nobles and senators and even the emperor to come over and see your events. And basically, where the auctioning goes is you're auctioning for different tiles that represent your, you know, your cast, your characters, your props, your, you know, your materials, everything that you need, your animals, everything you need to put a certain production. And each production that you are buying throughout the game has a requisite or a prerequisite of all these different tiles that you need in order to most most efficiently produce the show and get as many spectators as possible. And for each certain amount of tiles that you're missing, you deduct a few points, but you can still partially score that event. However, the way you get these tiles that represent your cast, your actors, your animals, and your props, the way you get that is through an auction system. And basically, you have 5 different areas with 3 tiles apiece. And in turn order, players take turns picking one of those 5 depots or one of those 5 slots to be up for grabs. But you must make a minimum of 8 bids. So it's really expensive, and you're using so much money throughout the course of this game, because again, auction bidding is not the only thing going on in this game. You're using so much other money to buy your events, to buy seats for your Colosseum, to buy additional space for your Colosseum. So it's not like you're so wealthy that you can just throw around 8 cash or 8 coins. And what's interesting about this game is theoretically you can win up to 3 auctions, because each individual, or up to 5, depending on 3 to 5 players, each individual player has to win at least 1 auction before we move on to the next player and their turn to, respectively choose the different slots that are available. So in theory, you can win multiple auctions if you have enough money. And again, you're just engaged in all these different auctions and just sometimes calling people's bluffs and really hoping for one depot versus the other. But at the same time, you don't want to gift something to another player for too cheap. Really cool game. The auction bidding works very well. And afterward, you even have a trading phase just in case you bought something or bid for something that you're not interested in the whole group. You only might have been interested in 2 out of the 3 tiles, but you might use that 3rd tile as leverage for a trade later on in the round. Really cool. My number 9 auction bidding game, Colosseum. And now we move on to my number 8, and that is Power Grid. And in Power Grid, at the beginning of each round, you are bidding for the different power plants. Players are trying to, acquire the best, most efficient power plants that power up the most cities and also use the best sources of fuel, or the most efficient or most economical sources of fuel. And you're trying to factor all those things in as you determine the value of a power plant. Now, what's interesting is, just like in Colosseum, and in High Society, you have a simple increase or pass. You either raise or pass auction bidding system. But the minimum is based on the number on the power plant. And the power plants range from 3 to like 50 based on how efficient and economical and just powerful they may be. So, a very cheap power plant will have a lower minimum cost, but a higher one will have a higher minimum cost. And what's interesting is you have a current lineup of cars that are available, and you also have a future market that you can kind of look at. And sometimes you're really eyeing something that's on the bottom market, and you hope that it climbs up. You don't know if it will come into the present market during the same round, but you're in this little bidding war, maybe even a fake bidding war with some of the other opponents to try to, again, not make them get that power plant for too cheap. Really cool, really neat. The money gets really high in this game. People do have money, but you do want to budget and, be as economical as possible. But at the beginning of the round, which is when the auction takes place, you have so much money that you feel like you have more options. Unlike Colosseum, where the auctioning takes place later on in the round and you have less money to work with. But again, really fun auction bidding element to this game. My number 8 auction bidding game, Power Grid. And now we move on to my number 7. And this is a game that is not classified as a auction bidding game under BoardGameGeek.com, and nobody really mentions it as auction bidding, but in my opinion, it's absolutely auction bidding that's taking place. And that's Taj Mahal by Reiner Knizia. Again, this is a India themed game where players are vying for influence with different court officers and court officials and even the mogul himself in order to place down palaces in 12 different regions of India to try to score points, connect routes, collect resources from the market and from other strategic spots on the board, and maybe even build the Taj Mahal in Agra itself. Now, the mechanism of this game is you're playing down cards, and each of these cards have either 1 or 2 symbols. And these different symbols correspond with the different officers or the mogul that you're trying to win influence for in each of the respective rounds. Now, what's interesting is you're playing these cards down and everybody else is playing their cards down. And at any moment, you can drop out of the bid. But the way it works is it's almost like you're bidding for multiple things at a time. And your currency, again, is these symbols that correspond with these court officers. So at the moment you drop out from a bid, if you are currently in the lead in any of the categories that you might be interested in, you could drop out and you will win the round in those different areas. That is really, really cool. You might win the vizier's favor. You might win the princess's favor. You know that if the auction keeps on going on, you might be in trouble and you might not win, but if you drop out right then and there, you'll get exactly what you want. And it's interesting because you have 4 different colored suits of the cards, and when you commit to one suit at the beginning of the round, you need to keep on playing cards from the same suit. So that's where the challenge lies. Really cool, fun auction bidding game where you don't necessarily feel that pressure of dropping out. As a matter of fact, sometimes dropping out early can be a relief and is rewarding. My number 7 auction bidding game of all time, Taj Mahal. Now we move on to my number 6 auction bidding board game, and that is Hollywood Golden Age. Again, another Dr. Reiner Knizia game. Auction bidding is absolutely his forte. It's probably one of his most repeated board game mechanisms, especially from his classic games. In this game, players are Hollywood producers trying to gather actors and directors and cameramen and seamstresses and Hollywood agents, even all in the process of trying to put together these different films. And as the title indicates, Golden Age, these are all actors and films and directors that were very, very, very well known during the golden age of Hollywood back in like the 40s or so, maybe 50s. So these are legendary actors. Some of them you may have heard of, some of them you have not. But the point is, it's really cool. It's really nice and interesting to try to get all these different films. And there's 3 different genres. And at the end of each round, you score for having the most successful film up to that point. At the end of the game, you score for having, the most successful film in each of the 3 respective genres. You score for having even the worst film, right? And you score for having the best directors. There's so many different ways of scoring, so many different things you're going through. You're going through the town of Hollywood, I guess, or through the area around Hollywood, and you're going to different studios and even the clubs, trying to recruit these different actors and directors, and hopefully, again, just producing the best films possible. Fun game. The auction bidding in this game is unique and interesting because when you win a bid, the money does not go to the bank. It's actually split among all the players. So losing a bid is not necessarily such a bad thing, because if you lose a certain amount of bids, then all of a sudden you are the wealthiest person in the table and you know what's going on. And also the economy of the game is centralized. You know how much money is in the game from the beginning, and that's how much money stays in the game throughout. So even mapping out and using your mathematical skills and the probabilities and so on and so forth, you can kind of have an idea of how much money each player has collectively and know how much you have to bid in order to just mathematically rule out someone else from competing with you. Really cool. Have so much fun. It's fun thematically, it's fun mechanically. My number 6 auction bidding game of all time, Hollywood Golden Age. And now we move on to the top 5, the cream of the crop. And my number 5 is 5 Tribes. And I love this game, designed by Bruno Cathala, Arabian themed game where players are playing a game of Mancala and moving different colored meeples into different spots and activating what those spots do. Kind of like a little bit of worker placement in that sense, a little bit of set collection with different resources that, exponentially get you more coins, and coins are worth your money. There's a little bit of area control because when you clear out a space, you put on a camel there and that indicates that that tile belongs to you. Beautiful production. But where does the auction bidding come into play? It comes into play at the very beginning of each turn because players are bidding for turn order. And the way it works is so neat because you have this little turn order tile and it indicates all your options as to how much money you could bid. You could bid 0, you could bid 1, 3, 5, 8, 15, I think, or 12, 18. So what's interesting is that every time you make a bid, the following person, if they want to pass you, they don't just put one more. They had to at least bid the next highest numbers. So then you have all these numbers to factor in. And sometimes, again, the money is hidden information in this game, but you might have an idea of how much money an opponent might have, and you might jump up to a higher number from the get-go because you want that first spot so badly. Really, really cool. And if you play 2 players, each player has 2 turns, so you can really manipulate the situation in order to make sure that your 2 turns as an individual player line up back to back, and maybe you could piggyback off of 2 of your turns to really capitalize and have a really big and prosperous action. Really fun. Love the auction bidding in this game. Auction bidding for turn order to me is so neat. My number 5 auction bidding game, 5 tries. Now we move on to my number 4, and that is El Grande, the grandfather of all the area control, area majority games. This is designed by Wolfgang Kramer and Richard Ulrich. This game here, again, just like 5 tries, the auction bidding comes in the turn order. Players have this group, a deck of cards, they're called your power cards, that range from 1 through 13. The lower number cards help you get more caballeros, which are your meeples, into your pool so that you could place them on the board, because if they're not in your ranch or in your court, you cannot place them on the board. The higher numbered cards, they get you lesser or even no caballeros into your pool or into your court. However, they will increase your chances of winning the bid because the higher bid will win. Now, interesting in this game is each player plays one of their power cards in turn order, starting with the starting player, and every other subsequent player cannot play the same exact card that a previous player played. So then they have the option to raise or bid. And sometimes when you know you're going to lose the bid, you can just throw away a very low number and capitalize on getting lots of caballeros into your court and save some of those higher power cards for a future turn. However, you might really be interested in being first in that particular round, and because of that, it might be worth throwing away or using one of your higher cost power cards. Really cool, really fun. The idea that these cards go away, you play your 12. There are some ways of retrieving these cards, but for the most part, they are gone, and you're gonna have to play the rest of your game, let's say, without your 12, without your 10. There's gonna be future rounds where you wish you would have had a particular power card still in your deck, but you no longer do. Really cool. You need to budget and manage those power cards very effectively throughout the game. My number 4 auction bidding board game of all time, El Grande. Now we move on to my number 3, and that is Carson City, the card game. And this is designed by Xavier George, or Javier Georges. I don't even know how to pronounce it, but this is the card version of Carson City, the bigger worker placement Wild West game. And this game is so cool because players are creating this their section of Carson City, which is comprised of these like tile-shaped or square-shaped cards, which have 4 different quadrants, and each of those quadrants has a different building or terrain feature that score you points throughout the game in different ways and piggyback off of one another. Also, you're working with an 8x8 imaginary grid as you're placing these tiles or these cards, next to each other, sometimes over each other. If the card underneath has a similar building underneath, you can overlap them, or if they have empty spots, you can overlap them. Manipulating that is so neat. But before all of that, you've got turn order auctioning, where players are bidding to draft a set of cards in turn order. Now, what's interesting about this game is that the turn order is based on a little bit like a trick-taking game. Each player has a hand of 9 cards in a unique particular suit to themselves. And they're playing these cards simultaneously. So there is no, pass or raise or pass type of auction here. We're all placing these cards simultaneously, and then we're revealing them simultaneously and seeing who won. So that's kind of like a little bit of a mystery, right? You don't know how much a player is interested in turn order. You're kind of winging it, right? So what's interesting is we all have cards from 1 through 9. We could only use them once in each era. There's 2 eras, each consisting of 9 turns, so that's 18 turns in total. And when you use a card, just like in El Grande, you lose it, right? You're not going to get it back until era number 2. But what's interesting is, how do you determine a tie? What if I and some other players have played the same exact number card? Well, that's where the different unique suits comes into play, because we have a character deck, which is part of the cards you could draft from during your turn. And on the top of that deck, there's always going to be a card that has the 6 different possible suits in a different sequential order. And based on that top card on the character deck, that will determine which suit has priority for tiebreakers. So even that will factor into your decision as to what number you might play, because you might feel more confident about an 8 when you know that you have the tiebreaker. However, if you know that you're towards the bottom of the tiebreaker list, you might consider playing that 9, right? So all these things factor into your decision-making processes as you look at the top card of that character deck, as you assess the different cards that are available for the draft, and as you look at the remainder of your cards that you have to bid with. Really fun, really cool auction bidding process. My number 3 auction bidding game of all time, Carson City, the card game. Now we move on to my number 2, and that is Cyclades, another amazing game designed by Bruno Cathala and Ludovic Maublanc. This game is a Greek-themed game where players, take control of different, Greek tribes or Greek, regions and leaders, and they're vying for controls of these islands, and they're using warfare, and they're building up armies, and they're building up navies, and they're appealing to the Greek gods or the Greek pantheon. Really fun, a little bit of conflict, a little bit of war, some creature monster cards that you're using your money to buy from. But at the beginning of each round, you're appealing to the gods, you're invoking the gods, you're making an offering to the gods, and that's basically your auction bidding for turn order, right? This is Bruno Cathala, like 5 tribes, you're bidding for turn order. And it's really cool in this game because what happens is a player places their bid on a particular god, and each round the gods will be lined up differently, and you can place it anywhere you want. You see a scale here of 1 through 10. You also see a 10 plus, just in case you want to bid more than 10, right? Now what's interesting is that after you're done with your turn, a player can pass you, or they can bid for their own individual god. But what happens is when they pass, if they do pass you for the same exact god, they're interested in the same god as you, then that forces you to remove your piece from that god, and right then and there, choose another god, which you might use to bump someone else out. Really, really cool, because again, you don't even know, sometimes you might want to bid really high to prevent a person from trying to remove you or bump you out. Or sometimes you might bid low on a god that you're not really interested in, because you know that it will push someone else's hand to bid a little bit higher, and you're hoping that they'll bump you out because you're not necessarily interested in that god for that round. You just don't want an opponent to get it for a cheaper price. But then again, they might not call your bluff, and you might end up playing that round with a god you were not interested in. Really fun. I love every aspect of this game, but the auction bidding is perhaps actually my favorite part of this game. Cyclades, my number 2 auction bidding board game of all time. And now finally we move on to my number 1. And this is actually the newest game out of these 10 to me, and it is Amun-Re, designed by Reiner Knizia. And here players are vying for control of 15 different regions in the Upper Nile, on opposite sides, upper and lower Egypt. And basically they're building up, pyramids that add to their wealth, and they're using farmers and caravans of camels and so on and so forth. And this game is actually divided into 2 ages, where at the end of age 1, all humanity is basically cleared up, signifying the end of the old kingdom, but the pyramids stay behind. And now we begin a next new age where we're vying for control for different regions again, but they've already been built up. You're no longer starting from scratch. So now some areas intrinsically are more valuable than others. Now, why do you bid in this game? You don't bid for turn order, but what you do bid for is you bid for the different regions that players are trying to occupy. And what's very interesting is each region has the same exact little track around it, where you see the different numbers. You see 0, 1, 3, 6, 10, 15, 21, and 28. And basically you can use that to bid for that location. And a player that goes after you, just like in Cyclades, they could bid for a totally different location, or if they're interested in the same location as you, they could place their piece on a spot above yours. So again, just like Cyclades, you have that idea of theoretically bumping a person out or compelling a person to pay a little bit more than they originally might have wanted to or intended to. But what's interesting about this, as opposed to Cyclades, and that's where I'm going to give the edge to this, is that kind of like in 5 tribes, you have this scale of advancing spots. It's not just 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 like in Cyclades. You have 1 to 3 to 6. So players have to think even more when they are, you know, getting into a little battle for an auction or for a bid, because it's not just a matter of paying one more coin than the previous player. You're going to have to cough up 3, 5, 6, 7 more coins than the player before you. And that can be rather painful. This game also has a little offering phase, which is kind of like an auction. It's like a hidden auction where players all are offering up to Amun-Re secretly a bunch of coins, and they all reveal it. That determines the collective offering, but that also determines player order for the future round, because whoever bid the most will get the first player turn order, and also whoever bid the most will get a few bonuses and rewards that the other players won't get. So there's even a little bit of auctioning in that sense, a little hidden auction as well. So this game combines a couple of different positive auction mechanisms into one wonderful package, and I enjoy it greatly. These are my top 10 favorite auction bidding board games. What's your favorite auction bidding board game? Perhaps you don't even like the mechanism. I know it's a little bit mathematical. It might even feel a little redundant sometimes as the game goes by. However, in my experience, I have really enjoyed auction bidding games. Again, comment down below. Tell me which are your favorites. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. This is Harry from When Harry Met Board Games saying everybody take care, stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.